morning everyone. So I'm Rob Cox, I'm an ESP podiatrist at the Royal Orthopaedic Hospital, and back in 2013 I was project lead for the setting up of a shockwave therapy service which importantly incorporates shockwave therapy. I should just say at the beginning as well that this was mainly for plantar heel pain, but we now treat insertional or non-insertional Achilles as well. So I thought I'd start by just giving you an overview of where we are now as a service. So I think it's fair to say that we're a substantial and growing service. We run over 10 sessions a week, that's Monday to Friday. We have 4 clinicians working within these clinics. We have a wide base of referrals, so we have referrals from GPs, we have referrals from tertiary referrals from other hospitals, and also referrals internally from physiotherapy colleagues and also from the orthopaedic surgeons themselves. But I think significantly we get good clinical outcomes. We get an 80% success rate with our shockwave therapy treatments. And also, I think I was just going to add on to that we've probably treated now in excess of 1,000 patients with shockwave therapy, and that's why this hand is now shaking. So really I just wanted to talk about what were the drivers for change, why was there a need for change, what was wrong with the current system, and what were the recommendations that we put forward, and how that service came to be commissioned. But I'm not a commissioner, so I will just talk about that very briefly. But also I wanted to touch upon reporting and also marketing, because when I talk about reporting, I'm talking about reporting outcomes, because I think both of those factors were very important in the success of the service and continue to be important for the success of the service. So what led me to sort of want to change things? Well, several years ago I was inflicted by heel pain, so I know how debilitating heel pain can be. And probably like many of you that treat these patients, you'll understand what an impact this can have on patients, both socially and economically. So a lot of these patients will come into clinic and they'll be off work because of the heel pain, they can't carry out their sporting activities because of the heel pain. And they're a bit fed up really, you know, and they've been everywhere, they've had orthotics, they've had their physiotherapy, and we know that it's a very common condition. It's the most common condition for being referred into foot and ankle specialists. But unfortunately, about 10 to 20% of these patients will go on to be chronic sufferers. And a bit like this chap here, I've often been left scratching my head wondering, well, what else can I offer these patients? They've had this, they've had the orthotics, they've had acupuncture, you know, what else is there? So around 2003, when we started setting this up, I was becoming more aware of the evidence around shockwave as well. So I needed to put a little bit more sort of meat onto the bone, so I decided to look at do a local audit. And over a 3-month period, it showed that around 17% of our referrals into foot and ankle were due to plantar fasciitis. And that's in keeping with the kind of national average of 15 to 20% of referrals due to heel pain. But I think importantly, it brought up other issues as well. So one of them was that there were multiple and fragmented pathways for these patients. So these patients were often caught up in these referral cycles where they were being seen by the GP, referred on to the physio, then they referred on to somewhere else. And you know, these patients were being seen by multiple practitioners, and often these processes were quite long. They weren't always seeing the appropriate clinician initially, so sometimes the first clinician they were seeing would be an orthopaedic surgeon who's not necessarily going to want to cut them open as soon as they first see these patients. But significantly, I wasn't really able to sort of gain from the information whether these patients were actually getting better or not, so there were no outcomes. So this is a very typical patient which I spoke about with the commissioners. This was a 46-year-old patient who was referred into the consultant at the Royal Orthopaedic Hospital with a 12-month history of plantar heel pain. And prior to coming to the Royal Orthopaedic Hospital, they'd seen a community podiatrist 4 times and a physiotherapist 3 times. And within the Royal Orthopaedic Hospital itself, this patient saw the consultant or a member of the consultant's team a number of 5 times. I think you can see where this is going. 3 visits then to the orthotist. Orthotist was taking impressions of the feet, issuing them, making amendments to them. Then 3 visits to the physiotherapist within the Royal Orthopaedic Hospital as well. So I calculated that this patient had probably had around 11 contacts within the Royal Orthopaedic Hospital and probably about 18 contacts in total, and that was just a guesstimate, so it was probably more than that. And I had no idea whether this patient was better or not. So around the same time as all this was happening, I was becoming aware of CQINs, which stand for Commissioning for Quality and Innovation, and some of you may have come across this, and I'm sure Sharon's aware of them. But it's an NHS initiative really to drive quality and innovation within the NHS. And this very much sat with what I wanted to do. So I wanted to improve quality by improving the service that we gave to heel pain patients, but also bring in shockwave therapy as an innovation. So I went on to put a commissioning proposal together, and this is just some of the recommendations that I made alongside the benefits. So this was a rather lengthy document, so I've just highlighted various points, but the top one being to have an evidence-based treatment pathway to improve outcomes and also reduce the number of contacts that are seen, so in theory saving costs. Having a joined-up pathway, so rather than a fragmented pathway, a pathway that's under one roof, and also, as I've already mentioned, recording outcome measures and introduction of shockwave therapy. So I searched the literature to see if I could find a pathway which met my requirements. So I wanted something that was joined up, something that was evidence-based, that would then result in good outcomes for the patients, but also a good patient experience, because often I would hear from patients, oh, I've been sent from pillar to post, I've seen this practitioner, you know, no one seems to understand what's happening. So I stole this from the American College of Foot and Ankle Surgeons. And some of you may have seen this in the past, but I liked it because, first of all, it's evidence-based. Secondly, it's joined up, so it's a tiered system. And the fact that it is tiered and you have treatments under different tiers means that you can actually take outcome measures at different points within the treatment pathway. So, for example, patients that come in to see us now, they will go automatically into tier 1. A lot of them will have already had these interventions, so they would have already had over-the-counter orthotics, stretching exercises, but I make really sure that we have done everything within that tier, because often there are things which are overlooked. For example, patients still walking around at home barefooted. And I had a chap once who had had the condition for around 10 years. And after getting a bit of a history, I found out that he worked from home, and despite having numerous orthotics, he actually spends most of his day walking around at home on hard concrete floors, and no one had bothered to tell him to actually wear something cushioning under his heels. But it was the shockwave that got him better. But so if, for example, the patient comes in at tier 1 and we exhaust that, we then review them 8 weeks later. If they're no better, then they'll go into tier 2. If they're better after, say, orthotics, then we would discharge them at tier 2 and take the recorded outcome measures at that level. So we had lots of meetings with the commissioners, and I had to go along, and the biggest thing I had to overcome really was the piloting of shockwave therapy. They seemed very happy with the idea of having a pathway, but they weren't so sure about the shockwave therapy, so I had to go along and give various presentations to them. But eventually they caved in, and this is part of the CQIN scheme. So there's an overarching goal to have a joined up evidence-based pathway with where we had to be effective in improving these patients' symptoms. So some of these indicators were improvement in outcome measures, recording things such as previous patient treatments and interventions, clinical findings. So I record things like BMI, age, smoking status, those kind of things, and obviously piloting the use of shockwave therapy. And Sequins our payment on is a payment on results scheme. So there were various milestones such as setting up the service, collecting data and publishing that data. And at each of those, end of each quarter, we would get as a hospital payments based on those results, which actually is a good way of doing it because you get a lot of support from the senior management then doing it this way because they don't want to lose the money. So concurrently to this, we had to put together an internal project plan. And once again, this is just an example of some of those actions. But I've highlighted two of them, and one of them being creating a database and the other one being marketing the service. So we were very fortunate in being able to get an IT specialist to come in and actually build us all singing, all dancing reporting database. So, which has various reporting functions. So you can press a button and it will tell you what the average age of the patient is, what percentage of patients are smokers, what the average BMI of our patients are. So as I said earlier, we would get initial PROM scores and patient characteristics at initial consultation and then again at discharge. And the benefits of that really are regular reports to commissioners so we can show them how well we're doing. And also we can validate our service and make sure it's basically doing what we want it to do. So this was taken from the database, and this was the PROM scores which we submitted to the commissioners at the end of the pilot scheme for shockwave. So as you can see, so foot function index at the top is a foot pain and function score, validated score. EQ5D is a quality of life score, and obviously first step is that significant measure for plantar fasciitis. And you can see there's quite significant changes between the pre and post scores, particularly around first pain in the morning scores. And this is another report, so it showed that we had at that time an 83% success rate. So that would be people reporting an 80 to 100% reduction in their pain symptoms. So just wanted to touch a little bit about marketing the service as well, because I think this was really important for the success of the service. So we did a few marketing strategies. I thought the internet was an important one. I haven't highlighted it, but a lot of patients will now look on the internet to see what services are provided locally. So I have patients now who are referred because they've looked on the internet, they see we offer a service, they go to their GPs and say, I want to go to the Royal Orthopaedic Hospital because they've got a heel pain service. So that's a real driver for referrals into the pathway. Also giving GPs information leaflets as well, that's a really good way of kind of drumming up business, if you like. But I think GP talks and CPD sessions, so I went out there when we first started this service and I spoke to the GPs and I spoke about heel pain and the causes of it and what the evidence is, but off the back of that I was selling the service to them and I saw quite a significant number of referrals increase because of that. I was hoping to bring a patient along today, but unfortunately had to drop out at the last moment. But this was a guy in his 50s who's a caretaker at a local school. And he'd had heel pain he's one of these patients that had heel pain for a ridiculous number of years, something like 15 years plus. And he'd had all the treatments you can possibly think of. He'd even had a fasciotomy as well, and we treated him with 3 sessions of shockwave, and he reported himself actually that his pain went down from 100%, as he put it, down to 5%. And even when I spoke to him, and this is probably a good 2 years down the line, he's still at that level. He gets the odd twinge, but his pain has reduced significantly. And really, for me, that's what it's all about. You know, it's about these bits of feedback that I get from the patient, and I probably actually should have now added a few more. But I was talking earlier about a patient who was diabetic, and she said to me, well, you cured my diabetes. And I said, well, how was that? And she said, well, you know, I was diabetic and now I can exercise and I've lost weight, and she's no longer on the medication. So there are other impacts of this, bigger than just sort of dealing with the heel pain. So just to summarise then, really, I felt at the time there was a real need for change, and there were some opportunities to change. And I think we've met our initial objective of creating a successful service with good outcomes for patients. Shockwave is definitely an important part, and I don't think this service would operate as well without it, because it bridges that gap between the normal modalities, treatment modalities, and sort of referring on for surgery. And finally, really, marketing and reporting for me were extremely important. So if you are setting up a service, I think those two elements are really important in the success of a successful service. And that's it.